Alright guys, big heads up for this video. I do talk about a lot of gruesome things, including pedophilia and rape. So if that's something that triggers you, please instead check out the description box below where I link some much more lighthearted and goofy videos. Hey, what's up guys? I'm Jillian Rogue, and today I'm going to be talking about 5 of the creepiest cults that seem to have revolved around children. The media has deemed David and Louise Turpin's home the House of Horrors, as it was discovered just earlier this year in January of 2018 that they had been holding their 13 children captive and torturing them for years. The case was discovered when their 17-year-old daughter escaped through a window and managed to call 911, an act she had been planning with her siblings to do for 2 years. When authorities arrived, they said she looked extremely malnourished and appeared to only be 10 years old, even though she was really 17. When the police entered the home, 3 children were locked in chains, and the parents had just released 2. The children's ages ranged from 2 to 29, and they were only allowed to eat once a day and only allowed to shower once a year. The parents would keep them shackled and padlocked to beds and beat and strangle them. Their punishments lasted for weeks to months at a time, and they were not even released to go to the bathroom. If they even washed their hands above the wrists, they were accused of playing in the water and then punished. They had never been to a dentist, and it had been 4 years since their last doctor's visit. They lacked basic knowledge of things, like many of them didn't even know what a police officer was or what medication even was. Literally the only thing they were allowed to do was to write in journals, and police found hundreds of journals that are now being used as more evidence against the parents. The parents would purposely buy appealing food such as pies, leave them out on the counter, and then only allow the children to look at it. They were not allowed to have toys, and they would sleep all day and be up all night. The 29-year-old only weighed 82 pounds, and one 12-year-old was the weight of an average 7-year-old. The family claims that David was much like a cult leader, and the atrocities committed to these children go on. The case is still ongoing, and the most recent headline I read was that they're facing 75 charges. Both David and Louise have pled not guilty, and there is actually footage of Louise laughing and smirking in court. The 17-year-old girl who escaped actually managed to have a secret YouTube channel where she sang songs she wrote that told her devastating story. All of the children are now being hospitalized, and they're in desperate need of necessities such as funding and clothes. If you would like to help, I've included some links in the description down below. This next cult was a UFO cult, but the atrocities committed were against children. Between 1989 and 1993 in Brazil, 19 boys went missing, and 5 bodies of young boys had been found that had been castrated and tortured. The authorities were struggling to put it together until one day a young boy came in and told them he had escaped his captors. He had endured torture, rape, castration, and mutilation. He testified to other children being kidnapped and then stabbed to death, and then their organs being sold on the black market. He even said his captors would sometimes even eat some of the organs. He even identified his captors as some very well-respected members of society. 2 doctors, a wealthy businessman, a police officer, and the leader, Valentina de Andrade. If that's how you say it. Andrade. Whatever. She was the leader of the Superior Universal Alignment, a UFO cult. She told her followers that the world was coming to an end and the only way to be saved was to follow her agenda. She believed that there was no God, but that Jesus was actually an alien, and that the ETs had contacted her and told her that they would send a spaceship down to save her and her followers if they did their work and spread their word. She was convinced that all male children born after 1981 were evil and had to be exterminated in order to appease the aliens. It took 11 years to solve the case, and 5 of the 19 boys' bodies were never found. 4 of the 5 captors identified by the little boy were prosecuted, but Valentina gave an alibi that she was out of town and was actually exonerated. She is still alive and still continues to guide her followers. David Berg was a preacher who took the Teens for Christ movement in 1968 and perverted it into his own Children of God cult, which surrounded around his own sick sexual desires. Now, this cult was and is huge, and Rose McGowan and River Phoenix both grew up inside the cult. In the year after forming in 1969, he recruited over 200 people. He called his followers his little lambs and prided them on how often they had sex, often in front of children. Pedophilia was greatly practiced and encouraged in the cult, and Berg's reasoning was that God had created children to make babies at around 12 years old. He would often call upon his followers to sacrifice their body in the name of God. By 1977, the cult had over 130 communities around the world. By 1983, the cult had over 10,000 full-time active members living in over 1,600 communities around the world. Berg died in 1994, but the cult and its acts continued. He molested his own daughter, and his adoptive son committed suicide in 2005. Before committing suicide, he stabbed another female member to death, claiming she had taken part in childhood molestation. His name was Ricky Rodriguez, and before he died, he filmed a video of himself declaring himself to be a vigilante avenging children who had been raped and beaten.
I want people to know that even though some of the things that I'm going to try to do are rather shocking and maybe not right in a lot of people's books, I want to explain some of the reasons behind them. So anyway, I'm just loading some of my mags here. Hope you guys don't mind if I do that while I talk.
Rose McGowan has been very vocal about her experience growing up in the cult. She claims that her cruel parents forced her to be with an older man, and that one of her earliest memories was of her being beaten for refusing to accept God in her heart. Dawn Watson grew up in the cult and escaped when she was 13. She said they were taught to express their love for God through sexuality. She said Berg would have members do flirty fishing or recruit new members by sleeping with them. Now, there is a lot of information on this cult, and its ties to Hollywood are kind of creepy. If you would like more information on it, I would love to do a whole video on it, so let me know in the comments down below if that's something that you would like to see. The story of Marcus Wesson, aka the Vampire King, is that of evangelical Christianity, the occult, and incest, sexual mania, and pedophilia. Marcus believed that Jesus was a vampire, and he was obsessed with them. He wrote his own Bible, convinced his family of 20 that he was God, and controlled them in a cult-like manner with endless abuse, rape, and molestation. He told them that the end was near and warned them of the day that the devil would show up at their door as a police officer. He held wedding ceremonies at his home to marry himself to several of his own daughters and nieces, one of which was only 8 years old, and he told her that God had chosen her to be his bride. He bore children with several of his daughters and nieces, and even married some of those children. He kept his 19 children secreted away from society, sometimes keeping them below deck of his sailboat for 4 to 5 months at a time. They also lived in an army surplus tent in the Santa Cruz Mountains for 12 years. For the boys, Bible studies were enforced with abuse, and the women were abused sexually starting as young as 7 years old. When they moved into a home, Wesson kept it very cold and had the children keep warm by sleeping in antique coffins that he collected. He gave all of his children vampire names, including Jeva, his 1-year-old son that he bore out of incest with a daughter, and it meant Jesus and vampire. In addition to telling them that the devil would come dressed as a police officer, he also made a suicide pact with them if anyone ever tried to separate them. That pact was carried out in 2004 when officers showed up at his house due to a disturbance call because 2 of his nieces were trying to get back the children that they had bore with him. He answered the door and said he would comply with the officers, then disappeared into his house and reemerged with blood on him. 10 of his children were found shot to death in a pile by one of his older daughters, who Wesson then murdered himself. The police officers never heard a single shot. Marcus Wesson was tried and convicted and sentenced to death on several charges of murder, rape, and molestation. Anne Hamilton Byrne was not just a yoga instructor with a liking for plastic surgery. She was a leader of a cult known as the Family, with over 500 members and 28 children. Many of the children were stolen from their mothers or manipulated out of their mothers, thinking they were going to a good home, and they were then held captive for over 2 decades. Anne had a plan to build the perfect race, one that she planned to build with these children. They were forced to bleach their hair, cut it in similar ways, wear similar clothes, and be homeschooled. She had convinced her followers that she was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ and would often tell them that she bore the children herself. They all had her last name, and they all believed that they were biological brothers and sisters. Anne just enjoyed collecting children. Because that's not fucking weird. But she also believed the apocalypse was coming and that she was training these children to lead the survivors. She had several women of the cult who were referred to as aunties take care of the children. They would beat them, starve them, and inject them with LSD. They regarded her as royalty, and she said she was royalty. She gave each member this picture of her to be placed on an altar in their room. By the early 90s, she had accumulated over $150 million in donations. In 1993, she was arrested for relatively small charges for fraudulent birth certificates. But she was never tried or convicted in any way for what she did to those children, as there was not enough evidence. Now she's 97 years old with advanced dementia, living in a nursing home in Melbourne. While many of the children have been coming out about what happened to them, many of the adult followers still remain loyal. Now that was some creepy ass shit. I don't know about you guys, but I need to go watch some serious comedy after doing this video. Well, I hope I didn't creep you guys out too much, but that's all I have for you today. If you like this video, please leave me a thumbs up down below so I know. And also, if there's ever a cult that I've talked about in any of my videos that you want to see a full video on, please leave me a comment down below and let me know. As always, please subscribe and hit the little bell to see more weird and creepy shit from me. Alright, all my little poop kings and queens, I will see you later.